Former Health Minister, Senator Stuart Syvret, today you gave a presentation to States members in the States lunchtime. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I was asked by a number of abuse survivors and campaigners and whistleblowers in recent months whether there might be some merit in me trying to convey some of the deeper issues to States members, issues that aren't properly discussed in public and aren't really understood. You know, the real narrative of the cover-up of crime and so much criminality in Jersey. I was sceptical myself about the value or the merits of doing so, and indeed the potential risks of doing so. But nevertheless, I was persuaded, so I contacted Deputy Mike Higgins, and he kindly, emailed States members and arranged the room.
And was it was it well supported sort of idea? Were you were you well received? And what you had to say, was that well received by the States members that turned up?
It's very difficult to say. I mean, there were more than I expected there to be. I thought there would only be about 4 or 5 perhaps, but I think there were about 12 to 15 at one point. So there were a reasonable turnout, yes, and they listened, I would say. They all appeared to listen and to understand and grasp that the issues I was raising were very, very serious. One of the key things that I wanted to convey to them, and that other people, activists in Jersey and elsewhere, had asked me to try and convey to them, was that they have to try and step back from merely the Jersey child abuse scandal, because at the moment most politicians and indeed most people think that that's been adequately addressed. They think that they've had a public inquiry, they've introduced some new laws, introduced some new policies, and that now all of that is fading away into the past as a controversy, and it's just becoming a distant part of history. What most States members fail to understand, and haven't really understood so far, is that, as dreadful as it is, the concealment of child abuse in Jersey is merely one facet of a multiple layer of criminalities, illegal activity, high-level state corruption in Jersey. We know that there are all kinds of very, very serious crimes have been concealed in Jersey, and we know that crimes such as perjury, conspiracies to pervert the course of justice, misconduct in public office are routine, almost normal in the Jersey system. So I had to try and convey to States members the truth, which is that Jersey actually faces a lot of really serious problems and some deep and profound questions about the actual safety of this community and its ability to protect people properly, and its ability to have actually the effective rule of law, which we don't have at the moment. And the shorthand activists and campaigners and we used to describe this, we used the phrase the Jersey situation, because that's a neat phrase that encompasses so much of the structural illegality of the island. So I spoke to States members about the Jersey situation. I also took the opportunity to try and get across to them the fact that old-fashioned style cover-ups, as traditionally done in Britain, were effectively obsolete. They don't work anymore. There was a time when the authorities, when a scandal arose, could have a kind of lame public inquiry, and that would last 10 years or something, and then in 10 years time they'd have to have another public inquiry that would get a bit better acquainted with the truth, and then there might be a third public inquiry maybe 20 or 30 years down the road when finally the full truth and the full facts would be admitted. That ability to delay the reckoning, to kick the can down the road, had always customarily been an important tool to the public authorities in Britain. But of course, since the arrival of the internet and information technology, that approach is obsolete, because now activists and campaigners against cover-ups and all kinds of public wrongdoing, effectively we are the historians. We are recording everything. It's archived. The facts are out there. They're recorded, shared amongst activists around the world. Every little thing that the authorities might think they've managed to elide, push into the sidelines, or not have looked at for the moment, it's all actually been noted, spotted, and thought about by activists around the world, and it's all archived, it's all curated. So we are keeping the true history of scandals these days, as they actually unfold. And that makes the ability of the authorities to engage in cover-ups much, much weaker.
Well, it's like you said, because we discussed this earlier, and on the blogs, your blog, my blog, Rico Sorda blog, myself, Polo, and others have exposed the Jersey cover-up and corruption. It's all there for everybody to see now. And of course, whilst the mainstream media still carry on supporting the Jersey establishment and putting out the Jersey establishment party line, well, what difference is it making us documenting all this stuff, reporting all this stuff, if the mainstream media carry on with the cover-up with the establishment?
That's absolutely right. We, in many senses, ordinary people remain pretty powerless to actually combat on a day-to-day basis the power of the mainstream media. You know, it does have a major effect on forming and steering public opinion, as I've written about in detail in other places. It is what I call the power of omission that is so important, such an important function that the media plays to power. So many important public interest matters just don't appear in the mainstream media at all. That power of omission is a very powerful tool that authorities and the powerful can use. But we as historians are noting and documenting and archiving all of the kind of things that usually get omitted. So whilst we can't combat the power of the mainstream media on a day-to-day basis, we know and they know that actually we are the true historians of the moment, and ultimately there won't be any hiding place from the true facts.
Well, I suppose if you look at the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, the Bloody Sunday inquiry, the Leveson inquiry, for one of the Chilcot, you know, all these massive inquiries. Now, all these inquiries take decades.
Sure.
The Lawrence family, I don't think received any real justice yet. The Hillsborough one, the truth has come out, but haven't received any justice yet. Yeah. And we're talking 30, 40 years. Sure. So all these people now who are culpable of the cover-up and the corruption, they're going to be long gone. They're going to be dead, a vast majority of them. So, you know, is anybody ever going to get held to account here? You know, going by that ethos that we're historians and we're documenting all this stuff. But what good is it going to do in the long run, in your view?
Well, I think we live in a fascinating and unique moment in human history. It's always been the powerful, no matter which era you look at in the past, the powerful have always controlled knowledge and the spread of information. They've controlled the public narrative, be they chieftains, kings, emperors, generals, whatever they may be.
Bailiffs.
Yeah, throughout human history. But suddenly, we are in that era where all of that power of control and secrecy and omission is just dead. It's over in terms of it being effective on any kind of long-term basis, because we have got the facts. And I think you will find that the capacity of, say, the British authorities to keep these scandals being kicked down the road for 20 or 30 or 40 years, as you correctly point out, that's going to dramatically compress. And the ability to keep these kind of scandals secret or only partly addressed is going to be much, much less than it used to be. And I've got no doubt at all that the Jersey situation will ultimately be one of those. I mean, there are so many investigators, activists, professional law enforcement individuals and officers in different jurisdictions around the world that know and see clearly the wholesale corruption of authority in Jersey, the breakdown in the rule of law here. So the Jersey establishment, the Jersey mafia, can carry on spinning this to its own little audience and to the public here in Jersey. But out there in the real world, a lot of people know the truth of Jersey. And as I said to States members today, Jersey is essentially a mob town. Since the end of World War II, gradually all meaningful power in Jersey has effectively been consumed by mafia syndicates, high-level international organised crime. Though those are ultimately the powers that truly control Jersey. Very large, very influential law firms, for example, who have clients worth billions of pounds here. These organisations, most of those kind of organisations and most of their clients from most jurisdictions in the world are in truth, to one degree or another, a load of crooks. Be they corrupt politicians, be they gangsters, be they bent public officials, whatever. You know, most of the client base really of places like the City of London, from outside around the rest of the world, most of these people are very unsavoury, and most of the money they're generating is very questionable. And effectively, these very powerful law firms, which control and make themselves huge profits from this money, they're essentially front organisations for the mob. These are international mafia syndicates, organised crime, and these organisations have effectively seized control of Jersey and effectively run the place now.
So this was the sort of stuff you were explaining to statesmen, because we've got to remember the states members. It's a new house, isn't it? Mm-hmm. You know, they're all, and there's a lot of, I suppose, a lot of the new states members will only know, you know, about the growing power suspension, you know, the child abuse sort of thing. They'll only know what they've seen and heard in the mainstream media, won't they? So, because not everybody's corrupt, you know, it's not as we know, it's not everything's a conspiracy. That people are genuinely just, for want of a better word, ignorant of the true facts. Yeah. Do you think you managed to get enough of those true facts across them today to gain some kind of support for the people like us and for the victims and survivors who want to see the rule of law on this island and good governance? Do you think you might have convinced anybody today?
That's a difficult question. What you say is correct, of course. There are a lot of new states members now, but really we can't put our faith and our hope in new states members, no matter how well intentioned and sincere they are, if the system is fundamentally broken. Those states members who attended today all listened politely and intensely. I said a number of things which a number of them will have found deeply shocking and concerning and alarming. I expanded upon some of the shocking acts of criminality that are known about by the public authorities in Jersey, but which have been covered up. And I think certainly a lot of the states members who were there will have found this shocking and perhaps will be thinking about how they can improve things. But as we know, unfortunately, if the fundamental system, the structure, remains so corrupt, with so much real power in the hands of the Crown officers and other people, entities like that in Jersey, then with the best will in the world, as long as the system remains broken, as long as Jersey effectively remains dominated and run in reality by serious organised crime, with the best will in the world, these states members are going to find it very difficult to fight that kind of thing. So I do hope they're at least starting to think about some of the problems now.
Well, a couple of things arising from what you say there. Look at what happens to people like yourself who do fight against these things. Mm-hmm. Former Deputy Trevor Pittman, Shona Pittman, you know, the list there's quite a long list of people who have stood up and tried to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. They destroy you, Stuart, don't they?
Oh, sure. And
so why would any new states member want to go through that?
Oh, I think that undoubtedly a lot of them are frightened, and this has been one of the clear techniques and methodologies used by mafias. You know, if you read and you study these things, one of the ways in which serious organised crime works in all kinds of jurisdictions is basically getting leverage and getting dirt and getting the power to manipulate or frighten local politicians, local authority figures, local regulators, all the way up to regional politicians, all the way up to state legislature. Members of these kind of bodies are expressly targeted, and all kinds of pressure is put on them not to do the right thing, and all kinds of temptations are put on in their way to encourage them into doing the wrong thing. So there's nothing surprising or unique about what's happened in Jersey. Serious organised crime happens in every organised jurisdiction, and it would be frankly astonishing if it weren't happening in Jersey. I think the particular problem we have is that so successful have been the mafia syndicates who operate from the City of London and into Jersey, so successful have they been in capturing the entire apparatus of the state that we don't have a naturally automatic allies. I mean, for example, this mafia has captured completely the police force in Jersey. They are effectively the police force, the prosecution system, and the judiciary. So it's very difficult for elected representatives to properly fight for these things to change. But we have to do so. We have to try, and we can only hope that the right change will happen faster.
Because again, one of my, I don't know if bugbear's the right expression to use, but I'll use it. One of my bugbears is, or one of the fundamental questions that I ask is, could what happened, the child abuse and the subsequent cover-up of it, could that happen again? And I always come back to the answer of yes, of course it can, because you mentioned it earlier. It's the structure, isn't it? Mm-hmm. We don't have an independent prosecutor. Our Attorney General, Solicitor General, Crown officers, they what's the word I'm looking for? They basically support the establishment, don't they? They advise the establishment on any possible prosecutions that could be coming, and of course, with a different hat on, they decide whether those prosecutions come or not. Mm-hmm. So, and we go back to, don't we, the letters patent, like you mentioned earlier as well, that these people, the bailiffs, deputy bailiffs, the Crown officers, and everything, well, all these people are totally unaccountable, aren't they? Mm-hmm. Isn't that where the problem lies? So what I'm saying is, what can any States Assembly member, any member of Parliament do, that could stop all this? What is the answer to this? Is what I'm saying, Stuart, is that what happened in the past, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, up to the 2000s, could, in my view, happen again. Mm-hmm. Okay, we've got a children's minister, we've got a children's commissioner, we've got all these people with lovely, wonderful titles, and they're all in charge of children. But isn't it the bare fact that because the way this island is structured, and the most powerful being people appointed by the Queen, this abuse and cover-up could happen all over again today, tomorrow?
Indeed, it could. I mean, one of the things I said to those members who attended today was, you can see the things that are malfunctioning in Jersey simply by conducting rudimentary thought experiments. For example, when I was the Health and Social Services Minister in 2007, I started to investigate and try to expose the child abuse cover-ups. Now, the Health and Social Services Minister is actually empowered by law and is required by law, if he gets any information that might suggest children are at risk or being maltreated, the Minister is obliged by law, has to undertake to investigate those matters. And indeed, the law also stipulates that all other states' departments are required to assist the Minister in any investigations into child protection failures. The states of Jersey, though, back then, the rest of the cabinet, of the executive, of the council of ministers, didn't like politically the fact that I was trying to carry out my lawful obligations and exposing all of the child abuse cover-ups, so they got rid of me.
So just to clear this up, basically, if you didn't investigate these claims and everything, you yourself would have been breaking the law.
Oh yeah, if I'd known, once I became aware of the wide-scale abuses and the fact that it had been covered up, once I had that knowledge, I absolutely was legally required to investigate. So
you had no choice.
It would have been, if I had had that knowledge and had not striven to investigate it, I would have been acting illegally, without question. It would have been an act of straightforward corruption. If I had known children to be at risk and I had then failed to carry out my legal requirement to investigate it. Absolutely.
So the people also were obligated by law, for other ministers and the rest of it were also legally obligated to assist you. Of course, we know they didn't assist you because they brought a vote of no confidence against you.
Yeah.
So they basically, what you're saying is, broke the law by doing that.
Yes, that's absolutely clear. And this is one of the reasons why I try to convey to states members that they mustn't be complacent and think just because they've had a kind of lame committee of inquiry that's it, they can clean their hands and it's all sorted. Nowhere in any of their new policies is this problem addressed. What happens next time a minister tries to properly carry out their legal obligations, and again the rest of the cabinet don't like it and gang up on the minister and get rid of that? Could happen again. That problem has not been addressed so far by the states, not been addressed by the public inquiry. It's a very, very serious matter, because effectively the rest of the departments of the states of Jersey back in 2007, by failing to support the Health and Social Services Minister, they were breaking the law.
So how can this be addressed? How can it be changed? We're looking for answers, looking for remedies here, what can be changed? So what happened to you as the whistleblower and the investigator by following the law? What can be done to prevent that happening again? Can there be legislation put in place? What is the answer?
I think very clearly the changes which need to happen are that there needs to be a wholesale revision of Jersey's current constitutional situation. We must have effective checks and balances in this island and proper scrutiny and independence between different states' functions. We need an independent, objective police force that will investigate crime and seek to fight crime, not on the basis which it's doing today under its political directorship, whereby it just refuses to investigate crimes that are inconvenient to the establishment. And that's simply not acceptable. We need an objective police force. We need absolutely an objective prosecution system, because it's an absurdity. You mentioned earlier about the fact that the Attorney General is the sole prosecution authority in Jersey. It's ridiculous. In the whole child abuse scandals, there were countless examples whereby the Attorney General and his department, the law officers department, had been, and they still do to this day, they routinely give legal advice and guidance to ministers and to states departments and to civil servants. But as we saw from 2007 and 2008 onwards, the prosecution system in Jersey was contaminated and politicised, because prosecutors like the Attorney General were getting complaints on his desk saying, we want you to prosecute this department and this civil servant and that civil servant. But he had actually been advising them.
Well, that's right. So he just goes and puts another hat on, doesn't he, and advises them.
Clearly, that's not a sustainable position. It just isn't. So we have to do all we can to try and, get Jersey to be cleaned up. I personally don't think we can succeed from within Jersey. Jersey has been too compromised. There's too much, frankly, mafia money and power in Jersey, and it's captured completely the polity to all intents and purposes. I do think, though, the clean-up will come from outside Jersey. I think sooner or later Jersey is going to carry on. Unfortunately, the Jersey establishment will carry on demonstrating itself to be incapable of meaningful and proper reform. So sooner or later it's going to come from the outside, and I think it will do.
Where from the outside?
Well, I couldn't say when this is going to happen, but it will come ultimately from London. Now, it's absolutely clear that certain elements of public authority in London have been corrupted, just as Jersey's public authorities have, largely by high-level financial crime, the power of big major law firms in the City of London and so on. The lobby that these organisations wield in London to civil servants, to politicians, etc., is immense. Very difficult to combat. But there's actually a danger to the British state in all this, in that certainly as far as the Crown dependencies like Jersey is concerned, Her Majesty, the head of the British state, is required to empower people like Jersey Solicitor Generals, Attorney Generals, Deputy Bailiffs and Bailiffs. She has to issue her personal letters patent, which is like effectively a kind of an archaic monarchical law making. The monarch writes and signs her letters patent. She's advised, on who to appoint and so on. It's not a personal choice she makes. But the fact remains, people in Jersey who are Crown officers have clearly been acting improperly and unlawfully We see that just in the case of the child abuse scandal of the last decade or so. Now, underneath the basic illegality in Jersey, of course, there's lots and lots and lots of dark money. We're looking at billions of dollars a year, go through a place like Jersey. And the great danger is, and it's a real problem, I think all British patriots should be concerned about, is that all of the kind of toxicity and crime and gangsters and inappropriate influence has now risen so high in a place like Jersey. The scandal is now starting to lap at the door of the monarchy. So the Jersey mafia clearly represents a clear and present existential threat to the reputation and standing of the British state. And sooner or later, that's going to have to be addressed. And people like the Jersey mafia and other organisations like this are going to have to learn the hard way that the British state cannot be dirtied in this way.
Because we're coming up to the 10th, and on the 12th of November this year, it'll be 10 years since our former police chief, Graham Power, was possibly illegally suspended. Now, I don't believe for a minute that could have happened without the say-so and certainly the knowledge of the powers that be in London.
Mm-hmm.
So, how are they going to come to our rescue, if you like? If they're what I believe to be complicit in this sort of thing, how can these sort of come to our rescue in Jersey and restore the rule of law and good governance if they're just as corrupt as the bunch we've got?
You're absolutely correct. Without a doubt, this is why I think our battle for civil society has to take place on a national and international level. Absolutely, public authorities in Jersey have been in London, who are responsible for Jersey, have without question been captured. Individual civil servants and officers within them have been lobbied, and have either been incompetent or they've been corrupt, they've been bribed in some way. This goes up the ladder up into actual organisations like the British judiciary. Clearly, there is judicial corruption.
Well, the Privy Council sign off. I mean, some of the legislation that has gone through our Parliament is just barbaric. One of it was described by Deputy Russell Labby as something you'd expect to see in North Korea. But the Privy Council is just rubber stamping all this stuff.
Well, that's an interesting point, and we are aware of these questions and these issues. I and experts I work with and national and international campaigners understand perfectly just what is going on. And one of the great difficulties and dangers, I think, for the British state is the fact that Britain has this unwritten constitution. It isn't codified. And the more you kind of dig into different aspects of the British constitution and you try to get into the centre of what's going on, it all kind of dissolves into fog. At the heart of the British constitution, ultimately all you find is a kind of mystical fog bank at the moment, where you can't see how it works, you can't see who's accountable for what, there are no clear lines of responsibility, there are no effective checks and balances, it's all so foggy and vague, it's impossible to scrutinise closely and to hold to account. And indeed, the Privy Council, whatever this entity actually is, and that's a very interesting academic study, has that vagueness and that woolliness to it. And because so much of the British Constitution isn't codified, that makes it immensely vulnerable to corrupt and improper manipulations. And that very much so is one of the reasons why we've got to try and clean up these systems and join with others who are working for improvements in the British Constitution, because at the moment there's a real risk, and in fact it has high-level organised crime, largely arising in Britain in the context of the City of London Commune, is now clearly a threat to the reputation and standing of the British state.
Well, because I just want to take you back a couple of minutes, is when you said that this is basically going to be getting embarrassing for the monarchy, for the Queen, with all the corruption that we've seen go on this island. But here's the $6 million question: what the bloody hell is the Lieutenant Governor doing over here? because he's here to be the eyes and the ears of the Crown.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything untoward's going on, and I know he's been made aware of a lot of corruption, whether it's in the planning, all sorts of corruption. I know he's been made aware of it. So obviously, so seemingly he should be telling the Queen about it. That's the way it works. He's the eyes and ears over here. So is it a case that the governor hasn't been telling the monarchy about it, or is it a case that the governor, the lieutenant governor, has been telling the monarchy about it, and they're part of the cover-up also, and they're quite happy for all this corruption to go on? Where does the lieutenant governor fit into all this?
That's a very fascinating subject, which I and other people have studied quite closely. I think one of the things that is clear, and I know this because I've seen correspondence, with Buckingham Palace, with Her Majesty's personal advisors. I've seen correspondence concerning Jersey, and it's absolutely clear from that correspondence that Her Majesty is being very badly let down by a stagnant, self-perpetuating, self-promoting clique of traditional British establishment chaps. And the most charitable thing that can be said about a lot of these people, including those that actually fill these advisory roles, is that frankly a lot of them are not competent, and they're simply out of their depth, and they just don't understand the realities of what is going on. I mean, for example, some years ago now, I think it was in the 1990s, the Crown agreed that it would no longer select and choose who the lieutenant governors were going to be themselves. And instead, that power would be handed over to the Jersey establishment.
Well, that was only done about 5 years ago.
And I think you will find it was done longer ago than that. So this is wholly unacceptable. It's actually structurally unlawful. A public authority such as the Crown in this case cannot in law abdicate express responsibilities and powers that it in law holds. So the abdication of Crown authority and instead letting the Jersey establishment choose who the lieutenant governors are going to be, with the monarch reduced to nothing more than a rubber stamp on the Jersey establishment decisions, that's actually structurally ultra vires. It's just not lawful. Now, Her Majesty should have been advised of that, and this whole notion of the Jersey establishment being able to choose who their lieutenant governors are is a legal absurdity, and that's one of the things that will be reversed. And it's absolutely clear that there are serious problems with the lieutenant governors of Jersey. Certainly the calibre of them has been mediocre, and none of them, so far as I've ever met, have had the training in law, in human rights, necessary for them to fulfil the proper role they're supposed to be fulfilling on behalf of the Crown, which is exactly to oversee the local powers that be, the local establishment, to act as a check and balance against them, just to make sure that the local establishment aren't corruptly abusing the rights of Her Majesty's ordinary powerless subjects in Jersey. But instead of fulfilling that traditional role that the lieutenant governors always did fulfill, they're now doing the opposite, and in fact they're acting as a lobby to authorities in London, lobbying on behalf of the Jersey establishment. And it's true that lieutenant governors routinely take non-executive directorships and so on, and other emoluments and benefits from the Jersey establishment. Now that's wholly unacceptable. Well, that's got to stop.
I'm sure it was the former police chief Graham Power that mentioned it before. So basically what you seem to be saying there, and I think he's said in the past, is, well, the lieutenant governor basically is supposed to be here to represent the interests of the Crown, of the Queen.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems that basically he's been coerced into representing the interest of the Jersey establishment.
Coerced is the wrong word. That implies unwillingness and that they've been forced. Co-opted is a better word. Yes, the posts of lieutenant governor and the powers that they have and the traditional roles they're supposed to fulfill have indeed been gradually over the years co-opted into being a part of the Jersey establishment apparatus, and clearly that can't go on and it has to end.
So okay, it's quite a long interview here, Stuart. I mean, I could talk to you for weeks about it, as you know, but we're going to have to wrap it up here. Is there anything else you would like to say before we close the interview?
I hope that the new estates members will now begin to realise that there are still a huge number of problems that they've not actually addressed yet in respect of basic security for things like child protection. You know, we don't have a separation of powers yet. We don't have an independent prosecution function. We have the same people who determine prosecutions who are responsible for actually advising over months and years malfeasant Jersey departments. And it simply can't go on. That hasn't been addressed by the Committee of Inquiry, along with a lot of other serious issues. So again, it's a question of, do our states members, the newer ones, do they have the calibre to exhibit leadership? Are they going to develop a new culture, which they need to have, whereby they won't passively defer anymore to what is often frank nonsense from people like the Solicitor Generals and Attorney Generals and so on, and will instead start thinking for themselves and just recognising that these changes have to be made?
Former Health Minister, former Senator Stuart Syvret, thanks for the chat today.
Thank you.